Sarah Martinez had always been the type of person who pushed through pain. Growing up in a military family in Texas, she learned early that showing weakness wasn't an option. Her father, a decorated Marine, taught her that mental toughness could overcome almost anything. So when she enlisted in the Army at 19, she carried that philosophy with her. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on Fort Bragg as soldiers gathered for the monthly physical training test. Sarah stood in formation with the rest of her unit, her camouflage uniform crisp despite the early hour. She had been dreading this day for weeks, not because she was out of shape, but because of the constant, gnawing pain in her left leg that had been getting worse. Colonel James Richardson was known throughout the base as a no-nonsense leader who demanded excellence from his troops. At 52, he still maintained the physique of a man half his age and expected the same dedication from everyone under his command. He had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq, earning respect through his unwavering commitment to duty and discipline. As the soldiers lined up for the 2-mile run, Sarah felt the familiar sharp pain shoot through her leg. She had been dealing with this discomfort for months now, ever since returning from her deployment. The doctors at the base clinic had given her pain medication and told her to take it easy, but she knew that wouldn't fly with Colonel Richardson. He had made it clear on multiple occasions that he had no patience for what he called excuse-makers. "Listen up, soldiers," Colonel Richardson's voice boomed across the formation. "I don't want to hear any sob stories today. I don't want to hear about your aches and pains. Every one of you signed up to be warriors, and warriors don't make excuses. You either pass this test, or you explain to me why you're not fit to serve in my unit." Sarah's stomach tightened. She knew she was in trouble. The pain in her leg had been keeping her awake at night, and she hadn't been able to train properly for weeks. But admitting weakness to Colonel Richardson felt like signing her own discharge papers. The first event was push-ups. Sarah dropped into position and began the exercise, grateful that this didn't aggravate her leg injury. She completed the required number easily, having always been strong in upper body exercises. The sit-ups went similarly well, and, for a moment, she allowed herself to hope that maybe she could get through this. Then came the run. As the starting whistle blew, Sarah began jogging alongside her fellow soldiers. For the first quarter mile, the pain was manageable. She gritted her teeth and focused on keeping pace with the group. But, as they hit the half-mile mark, the sharp, stabbing sensation in her leg intensified dramatically. Sarah's pace began to slow. Other soldiers passed her, and she could see the concern in some of their faces. Her friend Jessica, running beside her, whispered, "You okay, Sarah?" "I'm fine," Sarah gasped, though they both knew it wasn't true. Colonel Richardson was positioned at the 1-mile mark, watching each soldier pass with his stopwatch in hand. As Sarah approached, clearly struggling and, well behind her usual pace, his expression darkened. "Martinez," he barked. "What's your excuse for this pathetic performance?" Sarah stumbled slightly as she tried to maintain her pace. The pain was now excruciating, feeling like someone was driving a knife through her leg with each step. But she couldn't bring herself to admit defeat. "No excuse, sir," she managed to say between labored breaths. "I can see you're babying that leg," Colonel Richardson said, jogging alongside her now. "Are you injured, soldier?" Sarah wanted to say yes. She wanted to explain about the pain, about the sleepless nights, about how she'd been pushing through this for months. But the colonel's reputation for dismissing medical complaints was well known throughout the base. Just last month, he had publicly criticized a soldier for missing training due to what he called a minor ankle sprain. "Just tired, sir," Sarah lied. Colonel Richardson's face showed clear disapproval. "Tired? Soldier, I've seen grandmothers with more endurance than what you're showing me today. This is unacceptable performance from someone in my unit." Sarah felt tears of frustration and pain welling up in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She couldn't show weakness. Not here, not in front of everyone. She forced herself to pick up the pace slightly, though every step sent waves of agony through her leg. As they approached the final turn, Sarah's leg finally gave out. She stumbled and nearly fell, catching herself just in time. Colonel Richardson stopped running and crossed his arms as Sarah limped to a halt. That's enough, he said coldly. You're done, Martinez. Report to my office in 1 hour. We need to have a serious conversation about your commitment to this unit. Sarah watched as the colonel walked away, leaving her standing alone on the track. Other soldiers continued to run past her, some offering sympathetic looks, others carefully avoiding eye contact. She felt humiliated and defeated. In the hour that followed, Sarah showered and changed into a fresh uniform, all while her mind raced with possible explanations she could give Colonel Richardson. She knew that whatever she said, he wouldn't be satisfied. His reputation for being unsympathetic to soldiers' complaints was legendary. The colonel's office was exactly what Sarah expected, walls covered with military decorations, commendations, and photos from various deployments. Behind his desk hung a large American flag, and the entire space radiated authority and discipline. Sit down, Martinez, Colonel Richardson said without looking up from the paperwork on his desk. Sarah took a seat in the chair across from him and waited. Finally, the colonel looked up, his steel-gray eyes meeting hers. I'm going to be direct with you, soldier. What I witnessed today was unacceptable. In my 25 years of military service, I've seen every excuse in the book. Soldiers who think they can slack off, who think they can coast by on minimum effort. I won't tolerate it in my unit. Sarah felt her heart sinking. She opened her mouth to speak, but Colonel Richardson held up a hand. I'm not finished. You've been one of my stronger soldiers since you arrived here. Your performance reviews have been solid, and your fellow soldiers respect you. That's why today's display was so disappointing. I need to know what's going on with you. This was Sarah's chance to explain, but the words stuck in her throat. How could she make him understand when he'd already made up his mind about soldiers who couldn't meet physical standards? Sir, I've been dealing with some pain in my leg, she began tentatively. Colonel Richardson's expression immediately hardened. Pain? Soldier, let me tell you about pain. Pain is what our enemies inflict on American citizens. Pain is what our brothers and sisters in arms experience when they're under fire in hostile territory. What you're describing sounds like discomfort, not pain. Sarah felt her face flush with anger and frustration. He was dismissing her experience without even listening to the details. But she forced herself to remain respectful. With respect, sir, it's more than just discomfort. It's been affecting my sleep and my training for months. Have you seen a doctor? The colonel asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer and wasn't impressed by it. Yes, sir. The base clinic prescribed pain medication and recommended light duty. Colonel Richardson scoffed. Light duty. Of course they did. Martinez, let me ask you something. Do you think our enemies are going to give you light duty when you're in combat? Do you think the terrorists we're fighting are going to be sympathetic to your leg pain? Sarah felt her frustration building. She wanted to explain that this wasn't about wanting an easy way out, that she had always been dedicated to her service. But the colonel continued before she could respond. I've been in this man's army for over 2 decades, and I've seen what real sacrifice looks like. I've watched soldiers continue fighting with actual injuries, not minor aches and pains. I've seen men and women push through conditions that would send most people to the hospital. The colonel stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the base where soldiers were conducting training exercises. You know what bothers me most about this situation, Martinez? It's not just that you couldn't complete a simple PT test. It's that you're using an injury as a crutch. You're letting it define your capabilities instead of rising above it. Sarah felt something snap inside her. Months of pain, sleepless nights, and now being accused of making excuses for something very real had pushed her to her limit. But she knew that arguing with Colonel Richardson would only make things worse. Sir, I understand your position, but this injury is legitimate. I'm not trying to make excuses. Every soldier thinks their injury is legitimate, the colonel replied, turning back to face her. The difference between good soldiers and great soldiers is that great soldiers don't let minor setbacks become major obstacles. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, with Colonel Richardson making it clear that he expected Sarah to either overcome her minor discomfort or consider whether she was truly fit for military service. As Sarah left his office, she felt more isolated and misunderstood than ever before. That evening, Sarah sat in her barracks room, staring at the pain medication the doctor had prescribed. She had been trying to minimize her use of it, not wanting to become dependent, but the pain was becoming unbearable. More than that, though, was the emotional pain of not being believed or supported by her commanding officer. Her roommate, Jessica, found her there an hour later. "How did it go with the colonel?" Sarah looked up, and Jessica could see the defeat in her eyes. "About as well as you'd expect. He thinks I'm making excuses." "That's ridiculous. I've seen how you've been struggling with that leg. Anyone with eyes can see you're in real pain. Try telling that to Colonel Richardson. According to him, I'm just not tough enough." Jessica sat down on her own bunk across from Sarah. "You know that's not true, right? You're one of the strongest people I know. Remember when you carried Wilson for 2 miles when he twisted his ankle during field exercises? Remember how you volunteered for extra duty when Martinez was sick for a week?" Sarah appreciated her friend's support, but it didn't change her current situation. "None of that matters now. The colonel has made up his mind about me. Maybe you need to be more direct with him. Tell him exactly what happened to your leg." Sarah shook her head. "You know how he is. He's already decided that any medical complaint is just an excuse. Even if I explained everything, he wouldn't believe me." "But, Sarah, what you went through, that's not just any medical complaint. That's—" "I know what it is," Sarah interrupted. "But he doesn't want to hear it. He's made that very clear." As the evening wore on, Sarah found herself thinking about her deployment and the incident that had caused her injury. She had tried so hard to put it behind her, to move forward and continue serving without dwelling on what had happened. But now it seemed like her past was catching up with her in ways she hadn't expected. The next morning brought another training exercise, and Sarah knew she would have to face Colonel Richardson's scrutiny again. As she prepared for the day, she made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't continue living with the pain, both physical and emotional, of keeping her story to herself. But first, she would have to find the courage to tell the truth about what had really happened during her deployment, and why her leg would never be the same again. The next morning's training exercise was a combat simulation in the wooded area behind the main barracks. Sarah arrived early, hoping to warm up her leg before the demanding physical activity began. The autumn air was crisp, and she could see her breath as she performed gentle stretches, trying to loosen the tight muscles around her injury. Colonel Richardson appeared at exactly 0600 hours, as punctual as always. He surveyed the assembled soldiers with his characteristic stern expression, his eyes lingering on Sarah for a moment longer than the others. She straightened her posture and tried to hide any signs of discomfort. "Today's exercise will test your ability to navigate difficult terrain while carrying a full combat load," the colonel announced. "You'll be moving through the obstacle course in full gear, including your weapon, ammunition, and a 40-pound pack. This simulates the conditions you might face in hostile territory." Sarah's heart sank. The obstacle course included climbing walls, crawling under barbed wire, and jumping across ditches. With her leg injury, this would be torture. But she knew that asking for an alternative would only confirm Colonel Richardson's opinion that she was making excuses. As the soldiers geared up, Sarah's friend Marcus approached her. He was a veteran of 2 deployments and had served with Sarah during their time overseas. Unlike many of their fellow soldiers, Marcus knew the full story of what had happened to Sarah's leg. "You sure you want to do this?" Marcus asked quietly, adjusting his pack straps. "Maybe you should talk to the colonel about what really happened." Sarah shook her head. "You heard him yesterday. He doesn't want to hear about injuries or medical issues. He's made up his mind that I'm weak." "But, Sarah, what you did over there, that wasn't weak. That was heroic. If he knew the truth." "It doesn't matter," Sarah interrupted. "The result is the same. My leg is damaged, and, in his eyes, that makes me a liability. The exercise began with a 3-mile hike through rough terrain. Sarah managed to keep pace with the group for the first mile, though every step sent jolts of pain through her injured leg. The weight of her pack seemed to increase the pressure on the damaged nerves and muscles, making each movement more difficult than the last. By the second mile, Sarah was falling behind. Colonel Richardson noticed immediately and jogged back to where she was struggling. "Martinez, you're holding up the entire unit," he said sharply. "This is exactly the kind of performance that gets people killed in combat." Sarah wanted to respond, to defend herself, but she was breathing too hard to speak properly. The pain in her leg was becoming overwhelming, and she could feel her strength fading rapidly. "Sir," she gasped between breaths, "I need a moment." "You need a moment?" Colonel Richardson's voice rose in disbelief. "Soldier, the enemy doesn't give you moments to rest when you're under fire. If you can't handle a simple training exercise, how do you expect to handle real combat situations?" Other soldiers continued to file past them, some shooting sympathetic glances at Sarah, others carefully looking away. Sarah felt the familiar sting of humiliation, but this time it was mixed with a growing anger that she struggled to contain. "I'm doing my best, sir," she managed to say. "Your best isn't good enough," Colonel Richardson replied coldly. "I've seen recruits straight out of basic training with more endurance than what you're showing me." Something in his dismissive tone pushed Sarah over the edge. Months of pain, sleepless nights, and now being compared unfavorably to new recruits was more than she could bear in silence. "With respect, sir, you don't know what you're talking about," Sarah said, her voice shaking with emotion. Colonel Richardson's face darkened. "Excuse me, soldier? Did you just tell me I don't know what I'm talking about?" "Yes, sir, I did." Sarah straightened to her full height, ignoring the screaming pain in her leg. "You keep talking about what real soldiers do, about handling combat situations, about not making excuses. But you don't know anything about my combat experience or why my leg is injured." The colonel stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Then, enlighten me, Martinez. Tell me about this terrible injury that prevents you from completing basic training exercises." Sarah looked around at the other soldiers who had stopped to watch the confrontation. Part of her wanted to back down, to apologize and try to continue the exercise. But she was tired of being misunderstood, tired of having her dedication questioned, and tired of keeping her story to herself. "It happened 8 months ago, sir. During my deployment in Afghanistan." Colonel Richardson's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes suggested he was listening more carefully now. "My unit was conducting a patrol in Helmand province when our convoy hit an IED. The blast flipped our Humvee and trapped 3 soldiers inside. Private Johnson, Sergeant Williams, and Corporal Davis were unconscious and bleeding heavily." Sarah paused, the memories flooding back with vivid clarity. She could almost smell the smoke and dust, hear the ringing in her ears from the explosion. "The vehicle was on fire, sir. Fuel was leaking everywhere, and we knew it could explode at any moment. The other members of my unit were either injured or pinned down by enemy fire. Someone had to get those soldiers out." Colonel Richardson remained silent, but his posture had shifted slightly. He was no longer the intimidating commanding officer delivering a lecture about military standards. He was listening to a combat veteran's account of a life-or-death situation. "I managed to crawl to the overturned Humvee despite having taken shrapnel in my leg from the initial blast. The pain was incredible, but I knew those soldiers would die if I didn't act fast. The enemy was still shooting at us from the ridgeline, and our backup was at least 15 minutes away." Sarah's voice grew stronger as she continued, the details of that day crystal clear in her memory. "I pulled Private Johnson out first. He was the smallest, and I thought I could move him quickly. But, as I was dragging him to safety, a piece of burning metal fell from the vehicle and landed on my leg. It went straight through my calf muscle and lodged against the bone." Colonel Richardson's eyes widened slightly, but he remained silent. "I couldn't stop, sir. Sergeant Williams was still trapped, and the fire was spreading. I used my bayonet to pry off the metal piece and continued the rescue. It took 4 more trips into that burning vehicle to get all 3 soldiers to safety. By the time I was done, I had second-degree burns on my arms and a piece of shrapnel embedded so deep in my leg that it took 3 surgeries to remove it. The training area had gone completely quiet. Other soldiers had gathered around, drawn by the intensity of the conversation. Many of them had heard rumors about Sarah's deployment, but none knew the full story. The doctors told me that the damage to my leg was extensive. The shrapnel had severed several nerves and damaged muscle tissue that would never fully heal. They said I was lucky to be walking at all, let alone continuing my military service. Colonel Richardson stood motionless, processing what he had just heard. The dismissive expression he had worn moments earlier had been replaced by something that looked like shock. The 3 soldiers I pulled out of that vehicle all survived, sir. Private Johnson returned to active duty 6 months later. Sergeant Williams was medically discharged but made a full recovery. Corporal Davis lost his left arm but is alive and, well, working as a counselor for wounded veterans. Sarah's voice began to shake as the emotional weight of the story hit her. She had told this story to doctors and therapists, but never to someone who had been questioning her courage and dedication. So when you tell me that I'm making excuses, when you suggest that I don't understand what real sacrifice looks like, it hurts more than just my leg, sir. I didn't choose to have this injury. I got it saving the lives of 3 fellow soldiers who would have burned to death if I hadn't acted. The silence that followed was deafening. Colonel Richardson seemed to be struggling to find words, his usual confidence and authority shaken by Sarah's revelation. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" he finally asked, his voice much quieter than before. "Because you made it clear that you didn't want to hear about injuries or medical issues. You called them excuses. You said that great soldiers don't let minor setbacks become major obstacles. How could I explain that my setback wasn't minor, and that it came from doing exactly what great soldiers are supposed to do?" Colonel Richardson looked around at the assembled soldiers, many of whom were staring at him with expressions ranging from surprise to disapproval. He realized that his handling of Sarah's situation had been witnessed by the entire unit, and his reputation for fairness and leadership was now in question. "Martinez," he said slowly, "I owe you an apology." "Sir?" "I made assumptions about your situation without knowing the facts. I let my personal views about military standards cloud my judgment about an individual soldier's circumstances." Sarah felt a mix of relief and vindication, but also sadness that it had taken this public confrontation to get the colonel to listen. "The injury you described, the action you took to save your fellow soldiers, that's exactly the kind of heroism and self-sacrifice that exemplifies the best of military service. And I failed to recognize it." Colonel Richardson turned to address the other soldiers who had gathered around them. "Let this be a lesson to all of us. We serve alongside heroes every day, and sometimes their heroism comes with a cost. It's our duty to support our fellow soldiers, not to judge them without understanding their full story." He turned back to Sarah. "I want you to report to the base medical facility immediately for a complete evaluation of your injury. I'm also recommending you for a commendation for your actions during that patrol in Afghanistan." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes, but this time they were tears of relief rather than frustration. "Thank you, sir." "No, Martinez. Thank you. Thank you for your service, thank you for your sacrifice, and thank you for reminding me what true military excellence looks like." As the training exercise was called off and soldiers began to disperse, many of them stopped to speak with Sarah. Some thanked her for her service, others shared their own stories of hidden injuries and struggles. Marcus clapped her on the shoulder and smiled. "I told you that you should tell him the truth," he said. "I'm just glad it's finally out there," Sarah replied. "I was tired of carrying that story alone." Colonel Richardson approached her one more time before she left for the medical facility. "Martinez, I want you to know that this conversation has changed my perspective on a lot of things. I've been so focused on maintaining high standards that I lost sight of why those standards exist in the first place. They exist to prepare us to do exactly what you did in Afghanistan." "I understand, sir. We all want to serve at our best. From now on, I want you to feel comfortable coming to me with any issues or concerns. And I want you to know that your place in this unit is secure, regardless of any physical limitations you might have. Your experience and your character are assets that can't be measured by a PT test. As Sarah made her way to the medical facility, she felt a weight lifted from her shoulders that she hadn't realized she was carrying. For months, she had been struggling not just with physical pain, but with the emotional burden of feeling misunderstood and unsupported. The revelation of her story had changed everything. Not just her relationship with Colonel Richardson, but her own understanding of her worth as a soldier. She realized that she had been so focused on what she couldn't do because of her injury that she had lost sight of what she had already accomplished. The road ahead would still be challenging. Her leg would never be completely healed, and she would need to find ways to adapt her training and duties to accommodate her limitations. But now she would face those challenges with the support of her commanding officer and the respect of her fellow soldiers. Most importantly, she would face them without shame, knowing that her injury was not a sign of weakness but a testament to her courage and dedication to her fellow soldiers. 3 weeks after Sarah's confrontation with Colonel Richardson, the atmosphere at Fort Bragg had shifted dramatically. Word of her heroic actions in Afghanistan had spread throughout the base, and soldiers who had previously seen her as struggling with physical fitness now understood the true cost of her service. The base medical facility had conducted a comprehensive evaluation of Sarah's leg injury, confirming what she had been trying to tell everyone for months. The damage was extensive and permanent. Dr. Rebecca Chen, the orthopedic surgeon who reviewed her case, was amazed that Sarah had been able to function as well as she had. The fact that you've been completing any physical training at all is remarkable, Dr. Chen told Sarah during her follow-up appointment. Most people with this level of nerve and muscle damage would have been medically discharged immediately. I didn't want to give up, Sarah explained. This is my career, my life. I couldn't accept that one incident would end everything I've worked for. Dr. Chen nodded with understanding. She had worked with many wounded warriors and recognized the determination that drove them to push beyond their limitations. We're going to develop a specialized physical therapy program for you. It won't restore your leg to its original condition, but it should help manage the pain and improve your functionality. Meanwhile, Colonel Richardson had been doing his own soul-searching. The revelation about Sarah's injury and the circumstances surrounding it had forced him to examine his leadership style and his assumptions about his soldiers. He spent several evenings reviewing her service record, reading the incident reports from her deployment, and speaking with other officers who had served with her unit in Afghanistan. What he discovered troubled him deeply. Sarah's actions during the IED attack had been even more extraordinary than she had described. The official report indicated that she had continued the rescue operation despite being told by her squad leader to fall back due to her injuries. She had disobeyed a direct order to save lives, showing the kind of moral courage that the military honored above all else. Colonel Richardson realized that his strict approach to physical standards had blinded him to the deeper qualities that made a truly exceptional soldier. He began to question how many other soldiers under his command might be struggling with unseen challenges that deserved understanding rather than judgment. The colonel called a unit meeting one evening, gathering all his soldiers in the main briefing room. Sarah sat in the front row, still uncomfortable with the attention her story had generated but committed to being present for whatever the colonel had planned. I've been commanding soldiers for more than 2 decades, Colonel Richardson began, his voice carrying a different tone than usual. In that time, I've prided myself on maintaining the highest standards and pushing every soldier to excel. But recent events have shown me that I've been measuring excellence with too narrow a definition. He looked directly at Sarah as he continued. True military excellence isn't just about physical capability or technical skills. It's about character, courage, and commitment to your fellow soldiers. Some of you possess these qualities in ways that can't be measured by a PT test or a training exercise. The colonel moved to stand beside a large display screen where he had projected an image of the Bronze Star Medal. It's my honor to announce that Specialist Sarah Martinez has been awarded the Bronze Star for her heroic actions during combat operations in Afghanistan. Her selfless actions under enemy fire saved the lives of 3 fellow soldiers at great personal cost. The room erupted in applause. Sarah felt her face flush with emotion as her fellow soldiers stood and cheered. She had never expected this level of recognition for actions that had felt like simple duty at the time. But this isn't just about recognizing past heroism, Colonel Richardson continued as the applause died down. This is about changing how we understand and support each other as soldiers. From now on, this unit will operate under a new principle: we judge each other not by our limitations, but by how we overcome them. Over the following weeks, Colonel Richardson implemented several changes to the unit's training and evaluation procedures. He established a peer support program where soldiers could confidentially discuss challenges they were facing, whether physical, mental, or personal. He also created adaptive training protocols that allowed soldiers with injuries or other limitations to participate meaningfully in unit activities. Sarah became an integral part of these changes. Her experience with overcoming physical limitations while maintaining her military duties made her a valuable mentor for other soldiers facing similar challenges. She was assigned to work with the base's Wounded Warrior program, helping recently injured soldiers transition back to active duty or prepare for medical retirement. One of her first cases was Private Jennifer Walsh, a young soldier who had lost partial hearing in one ear during a training accident. Jennifer was devastated by the possibility that her injury might end her military career before it had really begun. "I feel like such a failure," Jennifer confided to Sarah during one of their counseling sessions. "I'm supposed to be a soldier, but I can't even hear properly anymore." Sarah understood the feeling completely. "I thought the same thing when I realized my leg would never be the same. I felt like I was letting everyone down, especially myself." "How did you get past that feeling?" "I had to redefine what it meant to be a successful soldier," Sarah explained. "I realized that my value wasn't just in what my body could do, but in what my experience and character could contribute to the unit." Jennifer looked skeptical. "But what if they decide I'm not fit for duty?" "Then, you'll deal with that if it happens. But, in the meantime, you focus on what you can control. Your attitude, your effort, and your commitment to your fellow soldiers. Those things matter more than perfect hearing." Sarah's work with wounded soldiers was just one part of her new role. Colonel Richardson also assigned her to help develop training modifications that would allow the unit to maintain its high standards while accommodating soldiers with various limitations. It was challenging work that required creativity and flexibility, but Sarah found it deeply rewarding. The changes in the unit's culture were noticeable within months. Soldiers became more supportive of each other, more willing to admit when they were struggling, and more focused on collective success rather than individual competition. The unit's overall performance actually improved as soldiers felt more comfortable asking for help when they needed it. Colonel Richardson's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic of all. The rigid, uncompromising leader had evolved into someone who balanced high standards with genuine empathy. He began sharing his own story of struggle and growth with his soldiers, admitting that his harsh approach had sometimes done more harm than good. "I spent so many years trying to make my soldiers tougher by being harder on them," he told Sarah during one of their weekly check-ins. "I didn't realize that true toughness often comes from having the courage to be vulnerable, to admit when you need help." Sarah appreciated his honesty. "It takes strength to change your leadership style after so many years." "You taught me that," Colonel Richardson replied. "Your courage in telling your story, in standing up to me when I was wrong, that showed me what real leadership looks like." The Bronze Star ceremony took place 6 months after Sarah's confrontation with the colonel. Her parents flew in from Texas, along with the 3 soldiers whose lives she had saved in Afghanistan. Private Johnson, Sergeant Williams, and Corporal Davis all spoke about how Sarah's actions had given them the chance to continue their lives and careers. "Sarah didn't just save our lives that day," Sergeant Williams said during the ceremony. "She showed us what it means to put others before yourself, even when you're hurt and scared. That's a lesson I carry with me every day." As Sarah stood at attention while the medal was pinned to her uniform, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The physical pain in her leg was still there, probably always would be, but it no longer defined her or limited her sense of purpose. After the ceremony, Colonel Richardson approached her family. He spoke at length with Sarah's father, himself a retired Marine, explaining how much he had learned from Sarah's example. "Your daughter changed not just my understanding of what it means to be a good soldier, but what it means to be a good leader," he told her parents. "I'm a better officer because of her courage and character." Sarah's father, who had initially been angry when he learned about the colonel's treatment of his daughter, found himself respecting the man's willingness to acknowledge his mistakes and grow from them. "That takes real character," he told Sarah later. "A lot of officers would have dug in and refused to admit they were wrong." As Sarah's military career continued, she found new ways to serve that maximized her strengths while accommodating her physical limitations. She was promoted to sergeant and eventually became the unit's training coordinator, developing programs that prepared soldiers for the psychological and physical challenges of combat while building the kind of unit cohesion that could save lives in critical moments. Her story became part of the training curriculum at Fort Bragg, used to teach both soldiers and officers about the importance of looking beyond surface appearances to understand the full measure of a person's character and contribution. Years later, when Colonel Richardson was promoted to general and transferred to the Pentagon, he kept a photo on his desk from Sarah's Bronze Star ceremony. It served as a daily reminder of the lesson she had taught him about the true meaning of military excellence. Sarah continued to serve with distinction, eventually becoming a master sergeant and mentoring hundreds of soldiers throughout her career. Her leg never fully healed, and she was never again able to run 2 miles without significant pain. But she learned to see that limitation not as a failure, but as a reminder of the price she had paid to save lives and serve her country. The story of her confrontation with Colonel Richardson became legendary at Fort Bragg, told and retold by successive generations of soldiers. But, for Sarah, the most important part of the story wasn't the dramatic moment of revelation or the recognition that followed. It was the lesson that everyone learned about the importance of supporting each other through challenges, understanding that true strength often comes disguised as vulnerability, and recognizing that the best soldiers are not always the ones who appear strongest on the surface. In the end, both Sarah and Colonel Richardson discovered that admitting weakness, sharing struggles, and supporting each other through difficulties didn't make them weaker soldiers. It made them better human beings, and, ultimately, better leaders who could inspire others to achieve their highest potential regardless of the obstacles they faced. The legacy of their story continued long after both had moved on to other assignments, serving as a powerful reminder that the greatest military victories are sometimes won not on the battlefield, but in the moments when we choose to see past our assumptions and recognize the heroism that exists in unexpected forms all around us.